We're going to keep the programming going with a really dear friend of mine named Corey Rich, and he's going to talk to you about images of an adventurous life. I've known Corey now for about 20 years. We've probably worked on about 25 to 30 different projects together, launching cameras, working with video, climbing mountains, working on hiking trails, climbing Mount Talac a few times, and we've really built a really nice relationship. He's an incredible filmmaker and cinematographer, but he started off as a rock climber and then turned photographer, then went to cinematography. And I remember the day he called me and said, Mike, tell me about that D90 camera that it has movies in. And that camera set the pace for him to become the filmmaker that he is today, along with, of course, his incredible talents. I want to welcome up to the Nikon Theater stage, Nikon Live, right here today with us from Lake Tahoe, California, Corey Rich, Nikon ambassador. And my brother.
Thank you, thank you. Hey, thanks everyone. This is, what a fun show. This is my first time at Imaging USA, and it's such an amazing crowd because what I realized immediately is this is a group of working professionals or aspiring professionals, and I love talking to that crowd. Today, I'm going to talk about my journey. While you might not shoot the same content that I shoot, I think many of the life lessons really translate to our careers. I'm an adventure photographer, and so I spend a lot of my life doing this, hanging off of a rope, trying to make images in pretty challenging environments. But what I'm going to talk about today is that journey. I think what we're all striving to do is lead a big, full life, both career-wise and outside of our life, and that means running a successful business. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey, and what I'd like to talk about is also the mistakes, like the things that I did well, and also the things that I didn't do so well. You know, we all have an origin story. You might have noticed I'm a shorter guy. I was a gymnast as a kid, and gymnastics, it turned out, was one of the things that led me into photography. I picked up a camera when I was a kid, and I started photographing the one thing that I had access to. I was in a gymnasium all the time, and so I checked out books at the library, and I started photographing when I wasn't working out, when I wasn't practicing. I was learning about shutter speeds and understanding what a moment is. But what I realized is that I had won a pull-up contest. I was a gymnast. I did 35 pull-ups, and I was invited to go rock climbing, and I fell in love with everything about rock climbing. School teacher took me out rock climbing, and I had these two parallel passions that were born at once. I wanted to go rock climbing, but I wanted to photograph this sport that I was so passionate about. And so two parallel passions were born in life, the pursuit of photography, of storytelling, and being out in wild places. So I got an internship at the newspaper in our local community, and I started photographing daily assignments. So this is migrant workers in the Central Valley of California. This was a heroin story, addiction to heroin story. You know, and the intern always gets kind of the crappiest assignments. That's how it really works. This is student of the month. But that's the thing in photography. It's not about being handed something amazing on a silver platter. You're given the student of the month, and you need to go out and actually make an interesting picture of this volunteer firefighter. And what I learned at the newspaper is you had to do it fast. You had 12 assignments in the day. I probably had 5 minutes with this student, and you show up, it's high noon light, and you're trying to figure out, how do I make a picture quickly? You know, I covered football, baseball, basketball. But what I realized is the more I shot these daily assignments, I was becoming a better photographer because it's muscle memory. The more you shoot, and you shoot on deadline, you do it every day, 5, 6, 7 days a week, you get better. It's like anything. If you run around the track, you get faster. If you shoot more, you make better pictures. But I found the newspaper was not my calling. And so I shot the pet of the week each week. That's part of an intern's assignment. But I would always try to bring back funny photos, and I would turn them into the desk, to the photo desk, and say, here's the pet of the week. You know, and they would laugh, and they would say, Corey, we can't run this as the pet of the week. So then I started a personal project, and my personal project was every assignment that I went out on, I had to find a photograph of someone picking their nose. Now, and it's important that it's a found moment. It couldn't be a setup moment. So this is a gymnastics competition. This was like the 4th of July parade. And I found myself getting more excited about these photos than my assignments at the newspaper. You know, of course I would shoot the front page image and the complimentary photos. This was first day of school. But I found myself more excited about this content. And the message in my head was, I realized this wasn't my calling. I wasn't going to be this was kind of a breakthrough photograph because everything else was telephoto. You know, it was 200 millimeters, 400 millimeters. This is more intimate. I'm wide angle, kind of right there in the moment, and it's layered. So, but I kind of finally realized what I wanted to do was tell stories, make pictures of outdoor adventure sports. I fell in love with photography because I wanted to photograph rock climbing. And so I saved up my summer's money, my internship money at the Modesto Bee. I had $3,000 to my name and a Honda Civic, and I took out all the seats in the Honda Civic except the driver's seat. You know, that's the advantage to being short. You can sleep in a Honda Civic. And I drove around the United States photographing rock climbing. And the way it would work is I would show up at a campground, and I would walk up to the campfire, and I would see some folks sitting around that are at this climbing area, and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Corey Rich. I'm a kid in college. I'm taking a semester off from college. And would you mind if tomorrow I photographed you guys rock climbing?" And it turned out 99.9% of the time, the answer was yes. I think they just sensed this passionate kid that I had one thing that I wanted to do. I just wanted to use my camera to make pictures. And so, but I was figuring it out along the way. I didn't know how to photograph rock climbing. I knew how to photograph the Pet of the Week and the 4th of July parade. But now I was going to apply these photography skills to this sport that I cared so much about. And so there was a lot of decision making. It's how do I get to the top of the cliff? Do I rappel down from the top? Do I climb from the bottom? You know, what time of day makes the best photographs? But what I did know is that everything that I learned at the newspaper applied to photographing rock climbing. And I think this applies to all of our careers, whether you're a wedding photographer, a filmmaker, a portrait photographer. Our goal is to photograph the subject matter that you're seeing every day, but surprise people with the images. Do it slightly differently. And every day that I was out shooting, I was trying to push myself just a little bit farther, a little bit further. It's how do you make it less literal and more surprising, the photograph. This is a picture of a rock climber clipping his rope into a quick draw. The way that it worked on this first 6 months on the road is my colleagues back at the Modesto Bee newspaper, they had volunteered to process my film. And I know I'm dating myself here because I was shooting E6 film, and I would ship like 10 rolls of film back at a time to the newspaper. And they would process the film, and then I would call from a phone booth, and they would review the photos with me over the telephone. And, you know, usually they would start with something to the effect of, do you want the good news or the bad news? And, you know, the photo staff would be gathered around a light table, and I'm in the middle of the desert in a phone booth, you know, paying 25 cents a minute. And I would say, give me the bad news first. And usually they would say, you know, your film is black. It's just, there's no exposures. And tears would come to my eyes, and then they would say, no, we're only kidding. And then they would give me real critique, and some of the best critique was, you're doing a great job of shooting the action, but we want to see you actually shooting the lifestyle, the moments in between the action. They were really pushing me to kind of see in a different way, pushing to not just bring back the expected image, but surprising images. This is on the side of El Capitan. We're probably 2,000 feet off the ground. And this is Tommy Caldwell, a climber. These are his feet hanging off the portaledge. And so, you know, the expected image is Tommy on the portaledge from above. But I'm always, as a photographer, and this is our job, you're forcing yourself to get into different positions, whether that's squatting down, whether that's climbing higher. And to get into this position is complicated. I'm hanging on ropes, and I have to move the portaledge. But I'm just constantly searching for what can I do that's different. You know, I like this photograph. This is my shadow. I'm hanging off of El Capitan in Yosemite, and this is a jacket blowing in the wind, and I have a camera backpack on my back, and a bunch of rope coiled hanging off of my leg so that it's not in the photograph. And for about 20 years of my life, I spent a lot of time hanging in this environment. This was really my office. And one of the most common questions that I get asked is, is this dangerous? Is what you do dangerous? And I like to tell this one story because I think we all can relate to this. we get so familiar with the things that we do. If you shoot weddings, you walk into a wedding and you know exactly how it's going to work. Well, this was kind of my commonplace. I was so familiar with being on the wall that one day I was photographing, this is Tommy Caldwell, one of my very best friends, and one of the greatest rock climbers of all time. He's 2,000 feet off the ground. He's free climbing the nose of El Capitan, he's the first male to ever photograph, or to free climb El Capitan on the nose. Third human being, Lynn Hill was the first, and then Beth Rodden, the second human being ever. And so it's early in the morning. We've slept on top of El Capitan, and we rappel in the open shade where the temperatures are just right. And as I'm photographing, this is the crux pitch, meaning the hardest part of this climb. And you know, it looks almost impossible. He's stuck in this corner. It's incredibly hard. And I'm up on a rope above him taking pictures. I'm hanging in space, sort of blowing in the wind. And then I realize my rope, a white rope, is leading all the way to the anchors, and it's in my shot. So there's this ugly white line in the photograph. And it's just a mistake. I forgot to untie the rope before I got up there to take pictures. And this is his climbing partner, out of focus in blue right here. So I yell down to Beth. I say, hey, Beth, can you untie my rope? And as you can imagine, Beth is pretty distracted. She's belaying. She's keeping Tommy safe on what at the time was one of the hardest 100-foot sections of rock climbing on the planet. And so I can tell she's a little annoyed. She reaches over, unties the rope. It swings out into space so that it's no longer in my photograph. I proceed to shoot photos, shoot photos, shoot photos, and then eventually Tommy comes flying out of the corner, and Beth catches Tommy on this red rope that you can see stretching around the corner. Tommy's quite frustrated. He's been up there for a couple of days now, and I'm trying to lighten the mood. That's so much of being a photographer, is you're interacting with humans. You have to make amazing photos, but you have to also create that relationship. And so Tommy's frustrated, and he kind of kicks the wall, and I say, to lighten the mood, Tommy, do you want me to come down there and show you how to do the climb? And he looks at me, and he says, do you want me to shoot a photo that's halfway decent and in focus? And we both kind of laugh. And so he starts lowering down to this rock ledge, and I put on a belay device, and I start lowering down to the rock ledge. And Tommy's about this distance to me. We're just on different ropes, and I'm lowering down, and he says, stop, what are you doing? And I stop, and he's staring at my hands, and I look down, and I realize the end of my rope is about a foot below my belay device without a knot in the end. And I'm about to rappel straight off the end of the rope 2,000 feet to the ground. And my heart comes out of my mouth, of course, and then I shove my heart back in down my throat, and I tie a knot in the end of the rope quickly. And it's just oversight. I was just too comfortable in that environment that I wasn't paying attention to the details. The lesson is never get too comfortable, right? Like we always have to be sharp. This is, part of what I love about climbing is I'm now over 3 decades I've been photographing the cutting edge of climbing and have become a bit of a historian in the sport. This is one of my favorite shoots. This is also Tommy Caldwell. Maybe some of you have watched a film on Netflix called The Dawn Wall, and it's about 2 climbers climbing El Capitan. Really fantastic film that I had the opportunity to be a part of shooting. But the 2 climbers, they climbed through the night because it was the coldest temperatures. And as a photographer, this is a dream, right? 99.9% of my career has been shooting in daylight, hopefully early in the morning, sometimes late at night. But this was an opportunity to shoot when it's pitch dark, and all of a sudden we could paint with light. I'm doing long exposures for the background. He's wearing a headlamp. I implemented using just a really bright bike light that I could mount on a tripod next to the climber or shoot it from where I was. You have to be there to make pictures. This is Kevin Jorgensen resting in the morning light in his portaledge. I've spent a lot of nights sleeping in portaledges like this. The question I always get is, how do you sleep in a portaledge like that? And the answer is, you're so tired by the time you get into this portaledge, you think you're in a Courtyard Marriott by the time you lay down. Just the coffee is a little bit harder to make here. I always say that this is, I think every photographer gets that question. What's your favorite picture? What's the best image you've ever made? I think we all make lots of great pictures, but it's the memories that are attached to the picture that I think escalate it to that next level. This is one of my favorite pictures, and I think it's because of the memories of being on that wall, that magic coincidence of light and composition happening at once. Every once in a while, our pictures, we get validated. We think it's special, and the world also signifies it's special by putting it in a special position. I've always been passionate about storytelling, and I've always wanted to be a filmmaker, but it was so difficult years ago to shoot still photography and shoot video. This is probably 15 or 20 years ago, and you can see I'm shooting Nikon for still photos, and I have a video camera hanging off of me. And I was switching, as many of us did in the early days of video. I'd shoot stills, then I'd let my Nikon camera hang to the side, then I'd pick up any one of these camcorder type products. And it was really difficult. And the look that came out of this camera was pretty mediocre. It was like f32 all the time. But I wanted the video to look like that still camera. And so over time, Nikon released the Nikon D90. That was a transformational moment for me. I could shoot on a camera body that I was familiar with, and I could shoot video that looked like my still photographs. Something that I like to talk about is just putting yourself in surprising places makes surprising images, right? Some of you might recognize this ladder. You might have this in your garage. This is a little giant ladder. And I'm always thinking about how do I put the camera in a different place. This was an ad campaign to launch Nikon's D4 camera. This is Alex Honnold, and we're in Joshua Tree National Park. And the funny story about this photograph is, oftentimes as photographers, we try to put ourselves in unique positions, but it doesn't always lead to an amazing photograph or video clip. We put so much energy into getting me at the end of this ladder to photograph Alex, and honestly, the photo was okay. But the gift came later. Years later, this photograph went viral on social media, and a European magazine ran it as like crazy things photographers do to get pictures. And a couple of months later, I got a letter in the mail from Little Giant's legal department explaining that this is not how they advise using the ladder, and they don't condone it. So it's, didn't make a great photo, got one of the best legal advisement letters of my career. So, you can't win them all visually. It's a decent photo. It's not great. I think this was the image that got used, and I think I was finally off the ladder. I'm just on a wide-angle lens. This was at the launch of the D4. I think as photographers, it's always something that we should be asking ourselves, what is it that what is it that I do that's unique to me that maybe the guy to my right or the person to my left doesn't have the same skill set? And I wish I had more to offer the world, except one of the things I can do is hang off a rope really well. Like, I don't mind hanging in a harness and putting myself in unique positions. And I think the key for me is once I'm in that position, it's switching gears, I know I'm safe, and then it's being creative. It's operating that camera, figuring out the moment, figuring out composition, and that leads to making interesting photographs. And so, and I think that's something that we can all think about. It's what's special that we have to offer, and how can we apply that to our photography. So I told the story of the folks at the newspaper telling me they wanted to see the moments in between, the lifestyle in between the climbing photographs. I really heeded that advice, and I started really photographing the in-between moments, shooting raw, kind of gritty documentary photography. This was a surf trip while I was in college. Went down to Pascuales, Mexico with one of my college dorm mates who was a former big wave surfer. And at the time, I was shooting a lot for Patagonia, the clothing company, and it was a pretty interesting arrangement. I would just ship my film, unprocessed film, to Patagonia, and they would pick the frames that they wanted, and then hopefully they would publish a few. Months after I went on this trip, this full-page ad in Outside magazine appeared. And, basically, let me see if I can read this. Yesterday I was eating lunch on the same table. Now the lady who cooked my meal is moonlighting as my nurse. There are things that you can prepare for in Mexico, but often you're confronted with the unexpected. Passing a kidney stone, jellyfish and tropical jellyfish stings, and this stomach infection from hell. 3,000 miles on the road and 3 trips to the hospital in 2 weeks. all for a few good days of surf. Still my answer to was it worth it? I'll be back, Tom Bulow. And so it's just this idea of capturing this pursuit, like these raw, gritty moments of getting to these places in pursuit of what you love doing. I realized that rock climbing, that's my roots. I love hanging off of ropes, but I also just love being part of the experience, on the adventure. This is in Patagonia, Argentina. We started, it's some of the worst weather on the planet, and the storm started to clear at about midnight, and so we decided after 2 weeks of bad weather, we started hiking in to climb Cerro Torre, which is one of the most famous peaks in the world. And as photographers, one of the things we're always trying to decide, certainly in the adventure sports world, is these are two of the greatest alpine climbers in the world, David Lama and Peter Ortner, and they're fast. Like, I'm carrying a backpack full of climbing gear and my camera gear. And I have to decide at what point am I going to ask them, I can only ask them to stop or wait a second a few times. And of course, as the sun started to come up and the magical light was hitting Cerro Torre, this is one of those moments where I said, hey guys, give me a minute. Let me get the camera out. And I run ahead of them, I shoot some frames. I run ahead of them, I shoot some frames. One of the other things that happens in the adventure world is you can probably just barely see it. That's my tripod on one of the athletes' backpacks. There's a reality that these guys are world-class, full-time athletes. I'm a pretty fit guy, and I love being outside, but I can't carry all the same climbing equipment and a set of Nikon camera bodies and Nikon lenses and tripod and keep up with them. So there's also this agreement with the athletes that we're going to kind of share some of the weight in order to kind of make things happen in the field. I love diversity of subject matter. This is Rebecca Rush in Moab, Utah, riding in one of the arches. I kind of like challenge also. I'm very guilty of when the phone rings and someone offers an assignment where I might not have the exact qualifications to do it. My answer is always yes. I'll figure out how to do it. This was water-filled cave exploration. There were probably 100 other photographers more qualified to do this, including Nikon ambassador Brian Scarry. But it also forces us to grow. You put yourself in these situations, and if you have this philosophy, which is I'll put in twice, 3 times, 4 times the amount of effort to make it happen, that's how we grow as photographers. That's how we grow as humans. How many of you have slept at 20,000 feet or higher by a show? And an airplane doesn't count. This is in the Karakoram in Pakistan, and we're at about 20,000 feet. It was a huge day. We had been climbing all day. We're dehydrated. There's 50-mile-an-hour winds blowing over this ridgeline, and we dig out a snow cave where we're going to sleep because the next day we're climbing a giant rock face. And this is kind of the curse and the blessing, excuse me, of being a photographer. All I wanted to do was crawl inside this snow cave with my climbing partners. But as a photographer, I'm standing out there in my boots and my warm gear, and it's about an hour earlier, and I realize at some point, the exposure of the sky and the exposure of their headlamps in the snow cave, it's going to be about the same exposure. And if I just hang on long enough, there's going to be a cool photographic opportunity. But it's really miserable. Like, the thing is, and I know if I get in that cave, I'm not getting out of the cave. But if I stand there and play mental games with myself and think about anything but how cold I am, how dehydrated I am, how tired I am, it's going to lead to a photograph. And it led to a pretty decent photograph. I thought about my dog and buying a Chipotle burrito when I finally made it back to the United States. And that's the thing with photography. You sometimes have to put yourself out there, be a little more uncomfortable. I had a mentor, Rich Clarkson, who was a former director of photography at National Geographic, and he had a great line, which is, if you're sitting in your house or in a restaurant drinking coffee, watching the sunrise out the window, or you're having a cocktail at night and you're watching the sunset, you're kind of blowing it if you're a photographer. That's when you're supposed to be outside. And that's when these moments happen. Love the diversity of assignments. I love storytelling when there's deeper meaning. This is a float trip down the Chillicothe River in Alaska. Went with a group of scientists that were studying the ramifications of the proposed pebble mine. Again, I think all of us have this opportunity to diversify in what we do. My roots are in rock climbing. I moved to Lake Tahoe. because of the summers. That's my home base. And then I realized it snows a lot. And so I've learned how to ski. I love bringing my cameras in these environments, you know, putting ourselves up high in the sky, giving us this kind of higher view vantage point leads to interesting photographs. One other lesson that I've learned over time is the athletes, the people that we work with, in my case it's usually athletes, they're brilliant people. They're performing at a high level, and oftentimes their ideas are wonderful. I've learned to really listen to the athletes. This photograph of the Jackson family, Eric Jackson, Emily Jackson, Dane Jackson, and Christine Jackson. The dad and the two kids, these are the three greatest whitewater kayakers of all time. Dane is now 21. I just went to his wedding about 6 months ago. But this is 15 years ago. I'm sitting in Tennessee, Rock Island, Tennessee, and I've finished a 5-day photo shoot with the Jackson family. And we're eating turkey sandwiches on their picnic table. And I say to Eric before I pack my bags, anything else you want to shoot? You know, I need to head to the airport in a couple of hours. And Eric's chewing on his turkey sandwich, and he looks at me and he says, yeah, as a matter of fact, I've always wanted to put the kids in the kayaks on the roof rack and do a photo. And I thought, hey, why not? And so we go out to the road, and I pull out a 300 millimeter lens, and we shoot this photo. This was the second best letter that I got from a legal department. I also got a legal department from the automotive manufacturer saying, like, we do not condone putting people on top of the car without seatbelts, which is, you know, that's fair legal assessment. This is my most widely published photograph, and it's kind of sad, the reason that it's the most widely published photograph. This is Stephen Koch. He was on a quest to snowboard off the 7 summits, so the high point on each continent. This is the high point, Karsten's Pyramid in Australasia. And the reason that this photograph has been published so much is there is no more snow on Karsten's Pyramid. So glaciologists and scientists use this photograph because it's one of the last records of glaciation on Karsten's Pyramid. So kind of not a happy story, but a reality. You know, specialization also leads to interesting opportunities. I joked that one of my skill sets is I can hang off of a rope. That's led to photographing all kinds of cool projects that require hanging off of a rope. This is a dance troupe, Project Bandaloop, in Salina, Kansas, that I shot for the New York Times Sunday magazine. I alluded to one of my real passions is video. My roots are in still photography. Nikon has helped really change my world with the rollout of technology that we all have access to, video-enabled, mirrorless, and DSLR cameras. I thought I would end my talk with just showing my reel. I spend a lot of time working alone and also with incredible teams shooting video. I think you're going to see some real similarities between the video and the still photography that I take. And at the end of the talk, I'm happy to chat with anyone about photography, video, or careers. But I hope you enjoy this a taste of what I do in the video world. Thank you. Cool. Thank you. Thanks. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. There's lots of other amazing presentations today, and I'll be hanging out around the booth if you want to chat. Thanks for listening.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Corey Rich. Stick around in 15 minutes. We're actually going to have Corey back to a panel. We're going to talk about the work he does with cinematography and using a program called Frame.io with Charlie Anderson of Adobe. We're going to talk about workflow and how you can actually share and edit on the fly with customers and clients. And we'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thanks for tuning in.